Thank you very much for inviting me over to Google. This is like coming back home for me because I got my PhD at NYU, not so far from here. I used to come over to Chelsea to go for a run and generally hang out. And I see that it's really kind of different now. Lots of new things, but it's nice to come back. Okay, so I have about 50 minutes, and in these 50 minutes, I want to really focus on three big questions, okay? Which I think will be of interest to you guys. It's of interest to most people in the world because most people are interested in happiness, okay? After that, we'll take the questions. The three topics I want to talk about are, one is something called the functionality of happiness, okay? And I'll define what that means and talk a little bit about it. The second question is the definition and the measurement of happiness. And the third question is, what does it take to lead a happy and fulfilling life? Which is, of course, the big question. Everyone's really interested in knowing the answers to that. Okay, but I think it's important to kind of start with some setup topics. And one of those setup topics is functionality of happiness. Okay, most of us think of happiness as being a very important goal. And there have been some surveys done around the world. One survey looked at, I think, about 10,000 respondents from 48 different countries. And these respondents had to rate different life goals. You know, making money, being successful, being smart, being close to God, right? Happiness. And happiness came out as number one, okay, in the survey. More important than making money, more important than being smart and successful, etc. On par with it was relationships, you know, maintaining good relationships, okay? But it's very, very important. Happiness is important. And the reason why it's important is because it just feels good, right? I mean, you don't have to explain why it's important. It's just nice to feel happy, okay? It's axiomatic almost. But what the research in the last about 15, 20 years has discovered is that it's also useful to be happy, okay? So I'm going to talk about three ways in which it's useful to be happy. One way is that happier people are healthier, okay? Happier people have better functioning immune systems, better functioning cardiovascular systems, better functioning respiratory systems. So you tend to live longer if you're happier, okay? In the context of work, what that means is that you tend to show up for work more often if you're happier. There was a study done where they looked at happy and unhappy employees in the United States, and the happier employees showed up for work 16 more days in a year. Okay, I don't know how it's at Google. Maybe you guys get a little more vacation time than most other people get, but on average, people get about 2 weeks off in the US, right, which is 10 working days. If you're unhappy, you're taking another 1.5 times that to be missing from work. That's a significant amount, right? I'll give you a kind of a synopsis of a brief study done on happiness and longevity. This was done with nuns up in a monastery in Massachusetts. This is a 100-year-old study, okay? They looked at these nuns, you know, whole life. They categorized these nuns into the happy nuns, medium happy nuns, and unhappy nuns. And the way they did it was by looking at the journal entries that these nuns had made when they entered the monastery. It was mandatory to maintain a journal, and so everybody's happiness was recorded when they entered the monastery. And the happy nuns had written things like, oh, I'm so happy to be here. This is where I wanted to be since I was an 8-year-old girl, and I'm one with God, with my sisters, you know, doing the kinds of things I wanted to do, eating healthy food, listening to, you know, these spiritually uplifting talks, and so on and so forth, okay? The unhappy nuns said things like, you know, this is kind of boring out here, okay? Life out there is a little more exciting, but I don't know, I'm stuck here. I don't really know how to kind of make my way through life outside. It's too chaotic out there, but this is not nice either. I mean, this is boring, okay? But anyway, I'll just kind of bide my time here, that kind of a thing, okay? Medium happy nuns were in between, and they looked at how long these nuns ended up living. Okay, on average, these nuns ended up living about 85 years old, okay? So that's a lot, right? That's 6, 7, 8 years more than the average American lives, okay? So if your only aim is to live a really long life, then you might want to consider becoming a nun, okay? But the really big theme, interesting theme that emerged from this was that the happiest group of nuns outlived the least happy group of nuns by a whopping 11 years. Okay, 11 years, that's a huge amount. If you think about some things that have a negative effect on our longevity, like smoking a whole pack of cigarettes a day is going to rob you of 3 years of your life. Right? Drinking a whole bottle of whiskey every single day, I don't know if anyone does that, will kill you about 7 years earlier, okay? So happiness is smoking plus drinking plus another year, okay? You can look at it that way. Okay, I know that one of you is from the McCombs School of Business, right? And some of my students there ask me at this point, Professor Raj, you know, kind of a tentative hand goes up and says, okay, you know, I derive a lot of happiness from smoking and drinking, so. Okay, I don't know if you can really be sustainably happy drinking one whole bottle of whiskey every day and smoking a whole pack of cigarettes, right? The next day you do pay for it, okay? That's been my experience at least. So anyway, so it doesn't work that way, okay? But anyway, so the idea is that happiness is important for health, and that's important in organizational contexts because that means that you're going to show up for work more often, okay? Happier people are more collegial. That's another reason why happiness is functional. If you ask yourself this question, who would I rather team up with? Somebody who's happy, supportive, optimistic, resilient, hopeful, sees the lighter side of things, builds on your ideas rather than shooting it down right off the bat, etc. Or somebody who's a wet blanket, right? Who's pessimistic and is generally negative. Obviously, you'd rather team up with somebody who's positive. And I think our instinct is that that is going to be more productive for me. Not just it's going to be more emotionally palatable, it's also going to be professionally more productive to team up with somebody who's positive and happy. And that's in fact been shown in the research as well. Happier teams outperform less happy teams, particularly in the long run. Okay, you might be able to kind of rely on some of the adrenaline and insecurity and negativity to kind of get work done in the short term, but in the long term, happier people, happier teams are more productive. Okay. A third way in which happiness is functional is that happier people individually, not in teams, individually, they're more creative and they're more objective. I have a study on objectivity, happiness and objectivity. Happier people are more capable of taking in negative feedback. And it makes sense, right? If you're unhappy, your immediate concern is, how do I get out of this? You know, how do I'm in a hole, how do I get out of this? You know, so they want to take care of their own emotionality, right? They want to get to a state of neutrality at least before they can really kind of look at the world and say, okay, what are the problems? How can I tackle them? Okay, their negativity is a big problem for them at that point. But if you're happy, you're much more likely to kind of rise up and look at the long term and look at what's good for you, good for the planet, and so on and so forth. And that's been shown in the research as well. There is a researcher in particular at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill by the name of Barbara Fredrickson. She's got a theory called broaden and build theory. And what she argues is, particularly in the long run, if you're consistently happy, you're more likely to have a lot more tools in your toolkit, so to speak, and you're broader in your approach. And the way it works is like this, okay? So imagine that you're on vacation. Let's say you land up in Mumbai, India, okay? Anybody been to India? Okay, lots of hands. Okay, you're there, and let's say that it's been a great flight. You got upgraded to business class. You slept well, right? And you had a pleasant conversation with the person next to you, whatever, okay? You're feeling fresh. You land in India, and you're not jet lagged, okay? That's one scenario. In another scenario, everything went bad, okay? You missed your flight, and you land in India, and the bags got lost, and you're now going to have to wait for another half a day or something before the bags show up at your hotel. And the hotel tells you, we can't check you in because the rooms are all gone, okay? And you have a headache too on top of it, okay? So in which of these two scenarios are you more likely to be exploratory, right? You look at a cute little quaint street, and you look at all these shops. Oh, wow, they're selling rugs. Okay, how beautiful. Okay, when are you more likely to kind of venture down that alley and look at all the things on offer and kind of sample them? Obviously, when you're in a positive mood, okay? So that's what's called the broadening aspect of positivity. When you're negative, you're more narrow in your focus. There was a Time magazine cover in 2003 or 2004 that had a side-by-side picture of a happy brain and a stressed out brain, okay? An fMRI image of a happy brain and a stressed out brain. And the happy brain was lit up all around, okay? Lit up, what I mean by that is that all parts of the brain were active. Oxygen was flowing to all parts of the brain. The unhappy brain, only what's called the limbic system, the oldest part of our brain that we borrowed from our reptilian ancestors. The limbic system is very good at making black or white decisions. Should I fight? Should I flee? Those kind of decisions, you're probably better off being stressed out. Okay, if that's your job, if you're in the military and you have to kind of figure out, should I fight? Should I run? Okay, you're better off being stressed out perhaps. But what this Time magazine article, what it talked about was that when you're happier, all parts of your brain are active. Okay, it's almost like a physical metaphor for this idea that you're able to draw from all your experiences in order to come to a decision when you're in a happy mood. So if your job involves making subtle decisions, making decisions in teams, convincing other people, right? Those are pretty creative tasks, okay? They call for a lot in order to persuade other people and so on. You're much better off being a happier person than being an unhappy person. Okay, you're more creative and you're more objective. Okay, so you put all this together, happier people are more healthy, right? Show up for work more often. They're more collegial, perform better in teams, they're more creative, they're more objective, you would expect that happier people earn more money, right? Do you think that's true? Indeed, it turns out happier people earn more money, okay? On average, happier people earn about 32% more than less happy people. Okay, there was a study done in which they followed these undergraduate students over a period of 60 years, right? And they measured their happiness first when they entered the undergraduate college. And I'll talk about happiness measurement in a little bit. And they looked at how much they earned. They divided these students based on their happiness levels into 5 quintiles, 5 20% groups. And the most happy quintile, the most happy 20% earned 32% more than the least happy quintile, okay? So those of you who are parents, we often worry about this idea of, okay, we want our kids to be successful. Of course, we want them to be happy, but we want them to be successful, and we think that success is going to lead to happiness, okay? So that's why we want them to be successful. In fact, I think there's more evidence for the reverse direction of causality, that happiness is a more reliable determinant of success than is success a determinant of happiness. In fact, success can often undermine your happiness for a variety of reasons, and there's an excellent book on the topic, happened to be written by me, okay? And the book is titled, If You're So Smart, Why Aren't You Happy? Okay, it's meant for people who are achievement-oriented like you guys, but sometimes we let our smartness and our success come in the way of our own happiness, which is like shooting ourselves in the foot, right? We want success because it's going to make us happy, we think, but then we end up adopting a certain set of mindsets and things like that that undermine our happiness. Okay, so that's one big topic I wanted to talk about, functionality of happiness. If you have any questions, if there are clarification questions, please ask them now. Otherwise, save them till the end, okay? I'd be happy to answer them. Second big topic, measurement and definition of happiness. Okay, so let me talk about definition of happiness. Okay, a lot of people object to the term happiness, including Barbara Fredrickson that I talked about some time back, this Broaden and Build theory person, right? So she prefers the word positivity because she thinks happiness is too frivolous. It's like smiley face. That's like pretending as if you're happy, or at best, it's going to be ephemeral. It's not going to last for a very long time. She'd much rather have something that's more long-lasting, like fulfillment or meaning or peace or tranquility, contentment, and so on. I'm using happiness here as a kind of a short word to represent all of these things. Okay, so think of happiness in my parlance as an umbrella term that captures not just pleasure, which we know is temporary, right? When you eat something good, for example, things like that, but also positivity, all the positive emotions that you can think of, like love and tranquility, peace, humor, laughter, interest, awe, gratitude, hope, serenity. There's like maybe 20 of those, okay? So all of those, but also some things that are actually a little more complex, okay? So meaning, let's talk about this thing called meaning. What I refer to as meaning is the satisfaction you derive from doing good to other people, right? I think that everybody in this world, most human beings, unless you're a sociopath, right, or a psychopath, actually, you're going to derive positivity from helping other people, and we know this from our experience with our own immediate kith and kin, right? Our own family, our own close friends, but our capacity to be nice to other people is actually universal, I would say, okay? And it's partly because of our hard wiring. We have something called mirror neurons, right, which help us kind of put ourselves in other people's shoes. If you think about it, it's actually strange that you walk into a movie theater and you watch two people who you did not know from Adam, right? Who you know are acting out roles. It's not even their real life, right? And you watch that and you get so moved that you come out all teary-eyed, okay? And they're so much in love, there's so much opposition, but in the end, they overcame all that, okay? And now they're together, and you want to be that agent of goodness and kindness after you see a movie like that, right? Okay, so that feeling of love that you see is because of those mirror neurons, okay? It's an artificial setup, you know that going in, and yet you can't help but be moved. That's because of mirror neurons. That's a hint at our capacity for being loving, kind, generous, and so on, okay? And that feeling that you experience when you see two other people being nice to each other, and that warmth, feeling of warmth and warm, fuzzy feeling, that's called elevation, okay? It's called elevation, and often it's associated with behaviors that you might think are not really indicative of happiness. You might actually be like tearing up, right? You might actually have a lump in your throat. You might be breathing a little bit heavily. To an external observer, you might not look very happy, but inside you know that this is a nice feeling. This is a warm feeling. This is a feeling of expansiveness. This is a feeling of wanting to do good to the world. And that's in a huge category of happiness for us, this thing called meaning, that I'm going to call meaning, which is being nice to other people, makes you feel really expansive, makes you feel really good, right? And sometimes in the process of being nice to other people, you might have to go through displeasure, right? Or unhappiness, or yourself. Like, for example, there's a time when this thing happened that I was with my son at an airport in India, and it was 3 a.m. and flights had gotten cancelled, and we were both really hungry, and we went to this cafeteria. There was just one samosa left, right? And I was super hungry, but he was hungry too, and I bought it and I gave it to him, and I was actually happy seeing him be happy, right? Even though I'd extended my displeasure, it made me happier at a higher level, right? So I'm deriving meaning out of this act, even though it's prolonging my displeasure. There's also another category called what I call purpose, which is doing something that's so intrinsically motivating for you that you lose track of time. You get so involved in the activity, so immersed in it, that you lose all self-consciousness, right? You and the activity kind of become one. You might look at the watch after 3 hours of doing that and say, wow, like 3 hours passed by. How did that happen? So these are called flow states, and they evoke a huge sense of purpose in us, okay? So when I talk about happiness, I'm talking about not just pleasure, not just positivity, I'm also talking about meaning and purpose. And in particular, it turns out meaning and purpose are super important if you want to be happy at work, okay? Obviously, pleasure is important, but pleasure can't last for a very long time. Positive emotions are important, but they tend to have a shorter shelf life as well, especially things like hubristic pride, right? That you get from comparing yourself to other people and thinking you're superior to them. That doesn't last very long. Okay, but meaning and purpose has the potential to last a really long time. And so if you're hoping to be happy at work on a sustained basis, then you need to focus on meaning and purpose, it turns out, okay? So I talked about this idea that, I want to, I'll also cover a little bit on the topic of measurement of happiness, right? So in the research, people recognize the difference between pleasure and positivity, which tends to not last very long, and purpose and meaning that tends to be more sustained, more long-lasting. And so they measure two kinds of happiness. One is called experienced happiness, which is what you're going through right now. And they also measure what's called reflective happiness, which is all things considered. If I were to take a step back on my life, even though I might be suffering from a headache right now, somebody might have shouted at me, I might be stressed out because I missed a train or whatever. But overall, all things considered, is my life going in the right direction? Are my career prospects good? Do I have enough of a bank balance? Do I have good relationships with people who matter? Right? That's called experienced happiness. And it turns out it's experienced happiness which is a bigger predictor of all these things that I talked about earlier, right? Better health, better teamwork, and creativity and objectivity and so on. So it's very important to focus on both meaning and purpose, but not, of course, sacrifice pleasure and positivity. Those are important too. But if we had to choose between them, I'd rather that you choose meaning and purpose rather than those two, okay? All right, so with that set up, let me talk about the big question, which is, what does it take to lead a happy and fulfilling life? And this is a question that has, of course, been very, very important for eons, right? The Buddha famously left his kingdom in order to search the answer for this question. Aristotle has been interested in it, you name it, right? Everyone's been interested in it. I think we live in a very, very lucky time now, because in the last about 20 years, there's been concerted effort to figure out the answer to that question, particularly in this field called positive psychology, okay? Right now, we have about 100,000 papers that have been written on the topic of what leads to happiness. And so we can say that we have a lot of scientific evidence and backing for many of the conclusions that have been derived from the research, okay? So I have about 20 minutes to talk to you about a topic that I spend typically 40 hours talking about in my regular semester-long classes. So this is going to be a very high-level bird's-eye picture that I'm going to give you, okay? So I would say if you look at the research on the topic and you take a step back, you would conclude that 5 things are very, very important if you want to be happy in life, okay? The very first thing is that your basic needs are met, okay? This is a no-brainer, of course, right? That if you don't have an idea where your next meal is going to come from, if you don't have enough money to pay for medical needs, if you don't have money to buy a home or rent a home, to have a roof over your head, if you don't have money for clothing, basic things, right? Transportation, education, you're not going to be happy, okay? Lots of evidence for this. If you look at the poorest countries in the world, they tend to be countries in which a huge critical mass of people are suffering from lack of basic needs, okay? If you look at the happiest countries in the world, okay, which tend to be the Scandinavian countries, most of the people there have access to all basic needs, okay? And that's a big reason why they are the happiest countries in the world, okay? I'm not necessarily recommending that we move to a socialist system, but if you can somehow cater to a large majority of people's basic needs, then you'd boost the happiness of the citizens of the country, okay? The second thing that's very, very important, you all look like your basic needs are more than covered, okay? So I'm going to move on to the other 4 determinants. The middle 3 determinants, I refer to them with a mnemonic. I'm from the business school, at the McCombs School of Business in University of Texas at Austin. So the mnemonic is MBA. You know, I jokingly say you need an MBA to be happy, okay? But here, the MBA is not what you think it is. The M refers to mastery. It refers to this idea that you can't really be happy, solidly happy, unless you feel, you know what, I'm really good at doing this one thing. Okay, maybe I'm not quite a master at it, but I'm progressing towards mastery. I'm making strides on an everyday basis. Slowly but surely, I'm becoming better and better at doing this one thing. Okay, now what that one thing is going to differ by people, depending on your interests, depending on your education, opportunities, and so on. But you need to have something that you're good at. And I would say that it would be a huge shame if you're not progressing towards mastery at work. Why do I say this? I say this because we spend about 80 to 100,000 hours of our life at work, which is twice the amount of time of our waking life that we spend in our personal life. Okay, think about it. We actually spend more time, twice more time with our colleagues and coworkers, and yes, our bosses, okay, than we do with our family and our pets and kids, okay? So that's a huge amount of time, and this is the context. Work is the context in which you're actually incentivized and given resources. There's no conflict of interest here to progress towards mastery, right? You're given money, you're given training, you're given resources, time, help, support, in order to become better at what you do, more skilled at what you do. So if you're not progressing towards mastery at work, then you're really kind of sacrificing a huge source of happiness, okay? Why is this mastery important? It turns out it's important for a variety of reasons. We get to experience these flow states that I talked about, where we lose track of time, and that turns out to be very, very meaningful. One of the big reasons why it's meaningful is because when you experience flow states on a regular basis, you have the answer to one of life's biggest questions, which is, what is my purpose in life? What is my purpose in life? Why was I put on earth for? Not what is the purpose of life. You know, that's a different question, right? But what is my purpose in life? You know the answer to that question if you're progressing towards mastery and if you're experiencing flow states. Okay, another reason flow states and mastery is important is because other people like you more when you're good at doing something, particularly if you're humble about it and you're not like, you know, bragging and chest thumping and all that. So lots of reasons why mastery is very, very important, and lots of studies show that, okay? So that's M. B is belonging. Belonging refers to this idea that you have at least one really deep connection with someone or the other, okay? There was a study done, and the eventual paper was called Very Happy People, okay? So not a very scientific name for a study, okay? And they looked at the top 10% of the happiest people in the study among the participants, and these people, these happiest 10%, had a variety of characteristics that were highly correlated, significantly correlated, I should say. They tended to live in smaller cities like Austin rather than bigger cities like New York, okay? They tended to be, believe it or not, more religious than less religious, okay? But they also tended to, if they were religious, they tended to believe, the happier people tended to believe in a loving God as opposed to a punitive God, okay? So maybe spiritual is a better word. They tended to be more extroverted rather than introverted. And so there were lots of things that were kind of correlated with being happier, okay? These were correlations. But there was one trait that every single last one of the top 10% of the people had. So it was no longer now a statistical correlation, it was 100%. You had to have this quality if you were to belong to the top 10% of the happiest people, okay? And this quality was that every last one of them had at least one really intimate relationship, right? Someone that they could fully depend on, they could call this person up if they ever ran into any emergency, and that person would have no hesitation in jumping to this person's rescue. They could let their hair down, be themselves, not fear that they would be judged, etc. Okay, so you need to ask yourself, okay, do I have such a person in my life? Again, I mean, maybe it's ideal if that person were to be a spouse, given the amount of time that we spend with our spouses, but 80% of the people who had that kind of a relationship actually named a same gender friend rather than their spouse, okay? So friends are very, very important, it turns out, okay? There's a line from the paper that I've actually memorized because I think it really captures the essence of that finding. And the line is, if you aspire to belong to the very happiest group of people, right? If you aspire to belong to the very happiest group of people, then having a sense of intimacy is no longer a luxury, it's a necessity. Okay, having a sense of intimacy is no longer a luxury, it's a necessity. So you need to ask yourself, is that true for me, right? And if you do want to be in the happiest group, then you need to have that sense of intimacy. Okay, the opposite of that is loneliness. If you're lonely, you don't even have even a single person to, forget about intimacy, right? To even understand you, to even kind of hang out with you, to go out and have a drink with you, to go and share a dinner with you, and so on. And loneliness is one of the biggest epidemics in the United States right now. I don't know if you guys know this. Okay, there's a very good book that came out on the topic about 4 years back. If you think you might be lonely or you know somebody who's lonely, I would highly recommend this book. It's called Loneliness by a guy called John Cacioppo. Okay. All right, so I talked about M, mastery, B, belonging, and before that I talked about basic needs. Okay, if you want to think about happiness as a kind of a mansion, right, or a palace, you can think of basic needs as the foundation. You need, without that, forget about building the mansion, right? You need that as a foundation. And then comes mastery, which is a pillar, okay, almost like a Greek, Roman, or whatever, you know, big pillar, fat pillar. And then the second one is belonging, okay, which I talked about. The third one is autonomy, okay, which is freedom, which is control, which is leading the life that you want to lead. This is where money comes in so handy, because if you have a lot of money, then you can do the things you want to do. You can live in the kind of house you want to live in, you can decorate it like you want to, you can go on vacations, you can eat the kind of food you want to, and so on and so forth. You can free up time too, right? You can outsource the chores that you don't like to do, okay? That's where money comes in handy, but money only takes you so far, okay? Now, I'll give you some evidence of the importance of autonomy. I'm going to talk about two studies, one done with rats, okay? And in this study, the rats were divided into three groups. Two groups of rats got to do Coke, not Pepsi, Coke, cocaine, Coke, okay? And one group was the control group of rats that did not get to do Coke, okay? They were all lab rats living out their lives in the cages in a lab, okay? Now, I'm against animal studies, by the way, okay? But this study, we learned something important, which is why I'm talking about it, okay? So the two groups of rats that got to do Coke, they were different in one way. One group, let's call it Group A, had control over when and how much Coke they did, okay? Group B, on the other hand, did not have control over these things. So every rat in Group B was tethered to a rat in Group A, right? And whenever the partner in Group A decided to do Coke, at that very moment, this rat, which was paired up with this rat in Group B, would also get the Coke in the same quantity, all right? So this rat in Group B might have been ready to go to sleep or have a chat with a friend or, you know, eat or what have you, and all of a sudden it would be high, okay, without knowing why, because its partner in Group A decided to get high at that point, all right? Was it clear? Okay, so two themes emerged from the study, okay? The first theme is that doing drugs is bad for you, okay? Doing hard drugs is bad for you. You're going to die an earlier death, all right? So the control group of rats outlived the experimental group. But the second theme that emerged, which is the more important one, the one which is more insightful, is that even if you do something that's bad for you, it's better to have control over when and how much you do it, right? So the rats in Group A, which had control over when and how much Coke they did, outlived the rats in Group B. Another study that I want to very quickly talk about was done with human beings. 1977 is when it came out, the paper. They went to this old age home and they divided the residents of the old age home into two groups. One group of these old age home residents had control over seemingly trivial decisions, what movies to watch over the weekend, what plants to grow in their rooms. Okay, two very, very trivial decisions, you might think. Nothing to do with the medical attention and who gets to visit them and so on and so. Those are much more important decisions, right? Very trivial decisions. So one group got control over which movies to watch, and you have to remember the 1970s. There's no iPad, right? Things were in black and white back then. Okay, people, I'm just kidding about the black and white, okay? We still had color. But people would watch these movies in a common room like this. It would be screened on a big screen. Everybody would be like together in this big room and watch it. So you had to actually make a choice of which movies to watch. It wasn't the case that, you know, you had an iPad, you could just press the movie and watch it, right? So it was a group decision. And the group that got to make the decision may choose, let's say, Dumb and Dumber or some movie like that, and everyone else had to watch it, okay? And also similarly the plant, okay? One group had a choice, okay, I want to grow a cactus, I want to grow this or that. The other group was just given a plant, okay, this is the plant you're going to grow. They came back a year and a half later, and every 3 months in between, and measured the psychological stress and happiness levels of these old age home residents, and they were completely taken aback by the results. Okay, the group that had control over these trivial decisions reported significantly higher levels of happiness and lower levels of stress than did the other group. And not just that, the mortality rate in the group that did not have control was twice that of that group that had control, right? Now, even in the group that had control, 15% of them had passed away in 1.5 years, which you might think is high, which is high really for the average person. But remember, this was an old age home. They were living out the last few years of their lives. Okay, but in the group that did not have control, it was as high as 30%. Okay, and they were surprised by these results, so they replicated it in another country in the United Kingdom and found the same results. All right, so if you have old people living with you, it's very important to kind of give them a sense of autonomy, a sense of freedom. Because it can be a huge source of stress. They're already losing autonomy over their physical body, right? Incontinence and things like that might happen. But on top of that, if they don't have psychological autonomy, that can really be really detrimental to their psychological health. All right, so I talked about basic needs, MBA. I want to talk about the last thing for about 5-7 minutes, and then I'm going to take questions. Okay, I'm going to ask Asen, my partner. We just launched a course literally 3 days back on edX. Are you guys familiar with edX? Coursera edX, okay? It's a free course, okay? It's called Happier Employees and Return on Investment course, okay? Because a lot of people think happiness is a luxury, but it actually has huge impact on your bottom line as well. So, which is why we want to promote it. It's totally free for you guys to take it, unless you want a certificate, right? If you want a certificate, then you pay $49. But if you're really interested in the topic, I really urge you to take it. Even if I say so myself, I think it's a well-produced course. Okay, it's pretty good. And he's done an excellent job with the website. He's going to show you a couple of features of it in just a minute. All right, so let me talk about the last thing. It's called abundance culture, or abundance mindset when it comes to an individual, which is a huge determinant of happiness. Okay, I characterize the mindset that people have as coming in two main flavors. I call it as abundance mindset and scarcity mindset. A person with a scarcity mindset believes deep down that life is a zero-sum game. For me to win, somebody else has to lose, right? Because they operate with that assumption, they tend to display a few characteristics. They tend to be more self-centered, they tend to be more vigilant, untrusting of other people, a kind of hoarding mentality, very vigilant, and so on and so forth. The person with an abundance mindset, by contrast, feels that, you know what, everybody can win, right? My success doesn't have to come at a cost to your success. In fact, if you're in the same organization, then my success will actually boost your chances of success, okay? Everybody's boats gets lifted up by the tide, kind of an attitude, right? So an abundance-minded person is like somebody who's going through life as if it were a rock concert, okay? Have you been to Austin City Limits, anybody? Okay, if you've been to it, then it's like being at Austin City Limits, right? If you're there and you're watching a band play and you look at the other person and they're going like, yeah, you know, you won't go like, how come this person's happy? How come I'm not happy, right? You'd go, yeah, that's awesome, right? I mean, so you basically, there's a little bit of this emotional contagion that goes on, that positivity flows from other people to you rather than making you feel threatened, okay, by other people's successes. So no prizes for guessing which of these two mindsets is better for your happiness. Obviously, it's the abundance mindset. But what's really surprising to a lot of people is that the abundance mindset is also better for you for your success, your chances of conventional success. You're not only likely to be happier, you're likely to earn more money, make more progress in your career, right? And achieve more status and so on and so forth. Why is that? Okay, so if you want to explore this topic, I'd recommend this book called Give and Take by Adam Grant, who talks about 3 categories of people: givers, matchers, and takers. Givers are abundance-minded people, takers are scarcity-minded people, matchers are most of us most of the time who are a mix of both, okay? And what he finds is that givers rise up to the top. There's a disproportional representation of givers at the very top of organizations. And we think that, you know, in order to rise to the very top, you had to be a bit of an asshole, right? You had to be willing to kind of tread on other people's toes and, you know, be unethical and cut corners and be self-centered, be a little bit Machiavellian even, you know, mean. But it turns out that's not true. Okay, that might have been true in the past, maybe in military setups and so on, but in the kind of world we live in, we inhabit, in the kind of jobs that we hold, it turns out that you're much better off being an abundance-minded giver than to be a scarcity-minded taker, okay? I can't walk you through all the logic of why that's the case, but just to give you a short kind of synopsis of the reasons why, it's because people remember what you did, okay, and how you made them feel. And so you build for yourself pools of goodwill if you're consistently operating from abundance than if you're operating from scarcity, and people remember it. And so when it comes turn for you to be promoted, etc., they will come and support you, okay? So it's because of that network that you create for yourself in a highly interconnected world that abundance-minded people have a higher chance of success, okay? Two things that I'm going to end with. Actually, I'll end with one thing, and then I'll ask Asen to come over. And hopefully the second thing that I want to talk about will come up in the Q&A. Okay, the one thing that I'll end with is that I often get asked this question, which of these 5 determinants that you've talked about, right, basic needs and MBA and then abundance mindset, is the most important, okay? And I say it's probably the abundance mindset. I'll tell you why, okay? Because you could have everything that you ever needed in life, right? Basic needs are more than fulfilled, huge amounts of progression towards mastery. You're an acknowledged leader of your domain or your field. You have lots of fame, you have lots of belonging, you have autonomy, everything going on. But if you have a scarcity narrative in your head, you're not going to be happy. There was a study that came out in 2014. It was summarized in the Atlantic magazine, and you can Google it. It's called Secret Fears of the Super Rich. Secret Fears of the Super Rich. In order to be a participant in that study, you needed to have $25 million invested in various financial instruments, right? Hedge funds and so on and so forth. This is like not counting your mansion and your yacht and your car and your house and everything, okay? $25 million solid money invested in things, and many of them had more, right? This is the minimum qualification to enter as a participant in the study. And they asked them, okay, what are your biggest fears? We all look at you and think, you must be supremely, you can do whatever you want, right? You must be ecstatic. Every day must be like, yay, you know? So they said, no, to the contrary, right? Okay, and their 2 biggest fears, one of them was justifiable, I think, is that they were worried about what would happen to the money when the children took over the money, okay? They thought that the children were spoiled brats, okay, which they probably were, okay? But the second fear was really kind of mind-blowing, is that they thought they did not have enough money. They felt insecure about the amount of money that they had, right? And it's easy for us to kind of, point fingers at them and say, they're hugely selfish, narcissistic, etc. But really, I mean, they were people like us before they got, had the money. And so something about money makes you, it corrupts you, okay? So you got to be watchful for it, and that's a huge topic. And the opposite of that example is also true. Okay, these are people whose life circumstances are characterized by huge amounts of abundance, and they have a scarcity narrative in their head, right? There's the other extreme, which is nothing. They have nothing, and yet have an abundance narrative in their head. Okay, there's a movie called documentary called Happy. I'd highly recommend it. I think it's available on Netflix. You can watch it. It begins with scenes from Calcutta, where they're interviewing these slum dwellers who are rickshaw pullers, right? They're not even like rickshaw drivers, right, with a cycle. They're actually literally pulling people, running around the streets of Calcutta. They have blisters on their feet, wearing tattered clothes, blood, etc., sometimes on their feet. Very, very poor. And they still seem to be quite happy, if not happy, at least content. So the researchers are flummoxed, and they ask them, how can you afford to be happy? We look at you and we think you must be miserable, but you seem to be okay. And they say it's because God is bountiful. Whenever we need anything, we just go to our neighbors, we ask them for some salt or sugar or whatever it is that we're missing, and if they have it, they give it to us. And when they don't have it, it's still okay. So what if you go hungry for a meal? We know that we're going to get another meal a little bit later down the road. Okay, so they have a narrative of abundance in their head, even though their life circumstances are characterized by scarcity. So no prizes for guessing which of these 2 groups needs antidepressants, okay, sleeping pills merely to fall asleep, and so on. So even if you have everything, if you don't have an abundance mindset, you're probably not going to be very happy. Okay, so that's why I think that the abundance mindset is more important than the other things. Okay, thank you very much, guys. I really appreciate you listening to me. So we started about 5 minutes late. Can we go 5 minutes over? Okay, so I'm going to invite Asen over here, and he's going to very quickly walk you through a couple of things on the website that he's built. He's really a whiz kid, I think. And he's actually used a Google platform, right?
Yeah, it's called Angular. So we use a platform to develop the front end of the website, which is right here. So the website's called A Heroic Journey, named after the course. The 2 main things that you can do on the website are there are different happiness activities you can do, and then there are different skills you can take.
And the reason why it's called Heroic, the course, is because happier employees and return on investment course, HEROIC, okay?
Yeah. So he's a marketing professor, so he put that together really well. So on the skills, you have these different skills you can take, and here's what we call the Bomba elements that Raj talked about. And then you have the happiness, SEM, and productivity. And after you take skills, you can see your results. And on this results graph, you can see your happiness at work, SEM, and productivity over time over these different dates. So what I actually did is I did an experiment with myself based off the research Raj had, and his research shows that happiness at work leads to greater SEM. SEM is greater satisfaction, engagement, and morale, and greater SEM leads to greater productivity. So this is a little more concrete proof that happiness at work leads to greater productivity overall, and you can see how your different scores are fluctuating over time and how they correlate with each other. Another cool feature is you have these Bamba pentagons, and you can see how you're doing in the different domains. As you can see for me, autonomy and mastery are really high, but belongingness is actually pretty low. And one struggle that I had there is I was too autonomous. I was wanting my freedom too much, that I was sacrificing intimate relationships. And these are all things you can do with just analysis, and the website does it for you. It gives you a chart, you see it, you see where the results are lacking or where you're doing well, and then you can make inferences from it yourself instead of having to track everything on your own. So that's one feature, is the skills. After you take the skills, you can see your results on a graph. Another feature is that we have different various happiness activities. My personal favorite one is the first one, journaling, which is the foundational happiness activity. And what you can do is after you set up your journal, you can make an entry, and then you can view your progress. Here you can see all your previous entries that you've made, order them by date or happiness score. Another thing you can do is you can see your happiness graph. So when you make an entry, you'll enter how happy you were for that day, and then we will track it for you and put it on a graph. My favorite thing to do is looking at it on days of the week. So you can see Mondays and Tuesdays are actually very high, and then there's just a huge dip Wednesday. Right? So I was really wondering why does this happen? If I go back to my entries and I sort by happiness, I see productive, nonstop work. So I was just working nonstop Mondays and Tuesdays, and that's why I was so happy. I was really productive Mondays and Tuesdays. The flip side to that comes on, you see Wednesdays are burned out, drained, and stuff like that. Because I was working so hard Mondays and Tuesdays, I was completely drained Wednesdays. So really connecting my happiness to something, like why am I happier certain days, why am I not happy certain days, helps me, that reflection helps me sustain my happiness. Because I'm knowing why the results are happening the way they are, and that's the best way to sustain anything, is knowing why it occurs the way it does. So all the happiness activities are meant to do that. You can set up the activity, make an entry, and then view your progress to see how you're progressing in the various domains of happiness and get real-time feedback for yourself.
Thank you, Asen. That was awesome.
So if you guys have any questions, please put your hands.
Gentleman here. Oops.
Hi, thanks for coming.
Yeah, of course.
How would you go about conditioning your abundance mindset?
Okay, so this is the topic that I wanted to cover. I'm really happy that you asked me this
and
question.
on a daily basis, too.
Okay, yes, of course. I see that you're carrying a notebook with you. Is that a journal?
Yes.
Okay, great that you're carrying a journal with you, because I carry a journal. Do you journal every day?
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. So I don't know if you do this too, and if you do this, then you're already doing one thing that's very, very important. Okay, it's called the 3 good things exercise. And every single day, okay, if you just make a note of 3 good things that happened to me in the journal, that's going to instill a sense of abundance in you, okay? Obviously, if you're doing it every day, then it's not going to be big good things like I got a raise today, I got a job at Google today, I met my soulmate today, right? Hopefully that doesn't happen every day, right? So it's going to be small good things, like, I got a nice parking spot, okay? And sometimes I actually kind of flip it. Even if I did not get a good parking spot, I got a parking spot way away from where I want to go, I turn it into a good thing, because then I say, oh, you know what? I got a bad parking spot, but the good thing out of it is that I managed to get a little closer to my 10,000 steps goal for today, okay? So I just walked a little bit more. This is very, very important to do, because we are hardwired to have what the researchers call negativity dominance, okay? We are hardwired to pay more attention to negative things that are happening in the environment because of our genetic hardwiring. Back in the savannas of Africa 2,000 years back, right, it was those people who noticed the negative things that actually had a higher chance of surviving. Okay, if you were positive and you only looked at like juicy low-hanging fruit and forgot to look at the tiger in the corner of your eye, you might get eaten alive. Okay, those people did not produce kids because they died early. Okay, we are the offsprings of people who had a survival mindset, who were very negative, who paid attention. But now it's actually working against us. The game has changed. We are not in the game for surviving, right? correct me if I'm wrong, but none of you is being chased by tigers and lions and whatever, and marauding tribes waiting to kill you and take your grain and women, right? Now, that's not happening anymore, right? Or men, right? So in this new world, what's important is to recognize that we are in the game of not surviving, we're in the game of thriving. And when you want to thrive, it's better to be happy, positive, and have, in fact, a positivity dominance. Now, it's going to be very difficult to kind of get rid of the hard wiring and replace it with positivity dominance. But at the very least, if you can have the pendulum swing from all the way negative to being somewhat positive, right, then you'll see a huge difference in your happiness levels and your abundance orientation. Okay, that's one thing that I would recommend. Second thing is to not spend more than 2 hours on your social media, okay, every day. It's a huge source of negativity because everyone's putting their best pictures and so on social media, and you look at it and you think your life sucks, right, in comparison to their life. Even though consciously you recognize that everyone's doing it, they're putting their best pictures and so on, to your subconscious mind, it looks at it and can't help but compare and say that I don't look that good, that person's same age as me and they look far fitter or better and they have better, spouses, more happy families or what have you. So that's the second thing that I would recommend. The third thing, which is tough to do in New York, but you have Central Park, is to go out into nature. Particularly to cell phone dead zones and internet dead zones, if you can, maybe once a month, something like this, just go out into the wilderness. Turns out that it's hugely reaffirming to be out in nature for your abundance mindset. Okay, don't spend too much time with scarcity-oriented colleagues or people. Okay, and spend more time with abundance-oriented stimuli. Watch movies that are more uplifting and elevation evoking rather than movies that stoke your desire for taking revenge, okay? Stuff like that. It's really, what you expose yourself to has a huge impact on how you think, right? That's the crux of it.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Yes, sir.
Thank you for the talk. What I wanted to ask about was related to happiness and success. Is there such a thing as being too happy, in the sense that, I read, maybe some papers on and off that, once you're really happy on your content, it's like you don't really have that need to go out and find something better. You're not like, I'm not in a place that I want to be somewhere better, but maybe that sort of, it kind of kills your drive. I've read it in some places. So what are your thoughts on that?
Right. So there is a paper on where they looked at a range of happiness from 1 to a 7, okay? And they looked at productivity at various levels of happiness. And it is true that if you're, I think in that study, if I remember correctly, they actually had a 9-point scale. So all the way from 1 to an 8, it actually kind of increased. And then maybe after 7, it kind of held steady, 7 and 8. But 9 actually went down a little bit in terms of productivity, okay? So if you're ecstatic every single day, okay, maybe that's not super good for your productivity. And not that it went down such a low amount that you were now back to being, a 1 in terms of productivity. It was more like you were at a level of 6 or a 7 rather than at an 8 or a 9, okay, or an 8. But what they did also find is that those very, very happy people still had very good relationships. So if you look at productivity in terms of work productivity, okay, there was a little bit of a dip at the very highest levels of happiness, but in terms of your relationships, it was increasing all the way to the very top. So, and that counts for something, okay? So yeah, at very high levels of ecstasy, it can come in the way. Yes?
Hey, great talk, by the way.
Thank you.
So you mentioned that having control over small things in your life makes you happy, right? So, but what about the decision-making fatigue? So sometimes it puts a lot of stress, like making small decisions, and you don't want, like, figure out for me, please.
Yeah, one thing to do is to decide, okay, which are the big priorities in my life, and I'm not going to, have you read that book by Mark Manson? The Subtle Art of Not Giving a...
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And the other one is Stumbling on Happiness.
Stumbling on Happiness.
They actually had a study on about the art students, and they had to. One of them had to keep the painting they draw, and one of them had the choice to exchange it. And the ones that had the choice to exchange it, they were not happy because they were thinking, oh, maybe the other one is better. So.
Right. So there is a concept called hyper-choice. So if you have too many choices, then it can actually kind of lower your happiness levels because you're not sure if you pick the right one, the one that's closest to your ideal point, and so on. So in some ways, it can be a curse to have too many choices. Okay. Mm-hmm. So you might want to avoid that situation. I think the important thing there is not to be what's called a maximizer, right, and be a satisficer instead. So maximizer is somebody who in every situation is trying to improve it even further, okay? So it's good to be a maximizer if you're in customer service or in marketing and you're constantly trying to come up with a better product and so on, which might be your job, okay? But if that maximizer tendency is kind of, also something that manifests itself in other contexts. Let's say that you go to a wedding and you ask yourself, why am I sitting at this table? Can I get a little bit closer to the bride? Or, why am I being served a little bit later? There's a little bit of a spot on this napkin here and so on. So in some situations, it's better to be what's called a satisficer. A satisficer is somebody who sets up a certain level of aspiration or wanting a goal. And then as soon as the first option exceeds that level, they just say, I'm happy with this, I'll just take this, okay? Rather than looking at further and further improvements to every situation, okay? So that's a good thing to adopt. I'm not saying that you should get rid of the maximizer tendency. It's useful in some contexts, but you have to be in control of which of these two tendencies you're displaying in any moment, rather than that tendency controlling you as a default, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yes?
Thanks. I was wondering, for the pillars that you mentioned, have there been findings on maybe their relative importance for introverts versus extroverts, maybe different prioritization?
That's a good question. So I don't think that there is a difference between introverts and extroverts. Not that there's been a whole lot of study on that, okay? On the 5 Bamba elements. I think it's equally important for all of them. When it comes to belonging, though, I think introverts and extroverts require it to the same extent, I think, but they just kind of require it in different ways. Okay, for extroverts, and one of the ways to kind of think about the difference is extroverts are people that actually get energized when they're in the company of other people. Okay, I'm an extrovert. Okay, if I'm feeling low, I would actually go out and seek out company. Introverts are the opposite. It drains them of energy when they go out. Okay, but both sets of people need at least one really intimate relationship. So that part is the same for both. It's not as if the introverts are happy just by themselves. Okay, they also need that. Just that maybe they need it in smaller doses, or just a few people are good enough for them rather than extroverts wanting a bigger circle. That would be the difference. Yes, this gentleman here.
Do I need the mic if I'm right here?
Yeah, sure, but the people in the back, yeah.
So you mentioned at some point that very successful people tend to be givers rather than takers, and I was just wondering, you said that it's counterintuitive that very successful people are givers, but does that hold true for people at like the very highest upper echelons of society, like CEOs of like super large online retail stores where you can get 2-day shipping and such? Like, would you say that they also abide? Are they also givers, or does it cut off at a certain point?
Okay, that's a good question, and I'm somewhat surprised that you didn't mention orange-haired gentlemen who fire people.
He was next.
He was next on your list. Yeah, so this is where I think that you really need to think about the social sciences are a little bit different from the natural sciences. Okay, social sciences you're going to get correlations. You're not going to get absolute 100%, confirmed kind of relationships. Like in physics, if you throw a stone at a certain rate from a certain height and so on, you can predict its trajectory and so on. With human beings, you can't do that. So there'll surely be lots of examples that are counterexamples to the things that I talked about. So you have to look at the correlations and whether they are statistically significant and so on. Okay, and I would say that even at the level of the highest CEO levels, you will find that this generally tends to hold true. This is Adam Grant's thesis, at least. Okay, and I'm not obviously as much of an expert on this topic as he is, but I'd so defer to him. And you'd have to read the book. And he doesn't, necessarily only look at CEOs. He looks at kind of, relative success. People who are higher versus lower, okay, at all levels. And what he finds is that, you're more likely to rise up if you're a giver than a taker. Okay, I'll just leave it at that. Thank you. All right, I think we're done, right?
Yeah, we're on time. Thank you so much, Professor Raj, for the talk.
Really appreciate it, guys. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone, for coming.